Hey Farhan, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm psyched. It's great to have you here. You were like, I think, as I was researching you, I think you're probably one of the top pair programming advocates in the world. I don't know if I've seen anyone that has done so much like blog posts and conference talks and things like that, like trying to sell people on pairing.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I think it's maybe self-reported that I'm assuming maybe the largest pair programming office in the world, right? About 120, 125 pairs. So
yeah,
about 250 people in one office. Engineers pairing. I'm pretty sure that's maybe one of the biggest.
yeah. I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone could beat that, really. But so you're the currently you're a VP of engineering at Shopify, so a small e-commerce startup in Canada.
Yeah, small.
Before that, you were VP engineering at Extreme Labs, which I think where that giant pairing culture was that you were talking about.
Yes.
And you also ran the largest Pivotal office at one point.
Yep.
And you were CTO at Helpful, which got acquired by Shopify.
That's right. You like
So
summarize the last 10 years.
yeah, just like that. So I mean, that's a lot of engineering and pairing experience to have there.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, have to give kudos to how I, learned about pairing at all. I went to school with this guy named Amar Varma, and he had me kind of just come by the Extreme Labs office when it was first starting, like 5 or 10 people. And I never had seen pairing before. I'd heard about it, rumor mill or, the legend of people who pair program. And then he told me, he's like, oh yeah, we've learned this from this company called Pivotal Labs. And you got to come by and check it out. And one of the reasons I, decided to like quit my job and join Extreme Labs was like, I'd never seen this level of intensity or learning that I saw in people pairing, right? I walked by a few people and I was like, they are talking and coding and intensely doing that 8 hours a day and doing nothing else. And I had to learn more. And the genius of Amr was he said, even though you're coming in as VP engineering, you're going to pair on a project to learn from the inside out what it means. And I paired with an intern. And between the two of us, either of us probably couldn't have built anything. I didn't know Ruby on Rails. We were building a Ruby on Rails application. And he was an intern at Waterloo, super smart, but had never built anything at scale. And over 3 months, we built a very complicated hedge fund trading system. And I was sold.
yeah, that's beautiful. My introduction was for pairing was I got my first Ruby on Rails job, which is like my first good professional development job. And I had done a lot of like dabbling on my own to like teach myself a bit of Ruby and a bit of Rails. But I sat and paired with someone who was much more senior than I was for maybe 3 or 4 months. And I learned just a ridiculous amount from him. That was like really a huge turning point in my like career as a developer because I didn't just learn Ruby and Rails, but also all of the other tools and the habits that go into being a professional developer that I wasn't going to pick up from a book about Ruby.
Right, including keyboard shortcuts and how
Yes.
you look up, like where do you go to search for information? And we would send emails. This is like when I was doing Extreme Labs, it was pre-Slack. We would send these emails to our clients, and we would pair on writing the email.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds weird, and people would say, "Oh, is that when somebody goes to the bathroom, whatever?" Like, no, no, no. Our engineers would say that's the most important part when we're when we're emailing the client. That's super important. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
not just the coding; it's the triaging the backlog, it's the writing the email, it's looking up information. Like it tends to be maybe even more important than the coding in some ways. And
Oh,
so
yeah. Yeah,
it's
and like
funny that,
source control and
right?
debugging techniques. Like I learned Vim because of that, and that has lasted me through languages. Right, like I don't write much Ruby anymore, but I still have this wonderful text editor ability that I started during those pairing sessions.
Right. And I think the one misnomer I want to, counter is that the learning isn't only for 3 or 4 months, right? I know that there are some
Oh yeah,
companies who pair program and they're like, oh, well, we pair at the beginning. I'm like, cool. Like, I love it. But the question I would have then is, do you think then the learning stops? Like, why did you stop pairing? Is it just that there's nothing more to learn? And I
yeah,
think that's where this idea of pairing as a high fidelity way to work with somebody equally smart, but with a different overlapping Venn diagram of experience really bears fruit.
yep. Strong agree. So, but before we go further, I'm curious, how do you define pair programming?
Good question. So for me, it's two developers on one machine. It usually does have two keyboards, two mice, and two monitors, but one computer. And of course, that you can extend that definition to be remote, But in the typical definition, it's two people also sitting beside each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, got it. So do you care in this definition about how often someone drives or how often you're swapping who's driving, hands on keyboard versus not?
So I don't. I know that there's a lot of interesting techniques that have emerged as I started researching more into pair programming after I got into it, like ping pong pairing. And there's another word for one where somebody drives, like somebody does the test and the other person solves the test. Like there's lots of structured techniques. I didn't really focus on the technique so much as just the pairing itself. The one mantra we did try to work through at Extreme Labs, but it wasn't as, I would say, as effective as it could have been, is that usually the more junior employee on the experience side would want to be the driver.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we tried to do. And it wasn't always possible because you do end up going back and forth. But I think the notion of the 2 keyboards, 2 monitors, 2 mice idea, and both people actively being engaged in the problem was my minimum bar. And then other techniques after that were more like pro tips.
Yep. I like that too. I share that definition, or I sort of echo it. And one of the reasons I think it's a good definition is because I think it takes a little bit of the intimidation factor out of pairing. Like I think pairing, kind of like Vim actually, has maybe a little bit of a marketing problem where people hear it and they think it's this complicated thing. It's going to be hard or not fun, or I need to spend months learning how to do this. But at the core of pairing, let's say, it's kind of just like you're sort of just working on some code with somebody. Like if you've ever been like, hey, can you take a look at this with me? And they sit down next to you, like you're, to my definition, you're pairing. It's great if they can bring a keyboard and you swap off, who's driving from time to time. But even if it's just 2 heads looking at the same code, to me, you're on your way.
Yeah, see, so I love that. So we're aligned on this definition. I would say it's almost like when somebody was doing that, you could almost like take a picture and be like, congrats, you're pairing. Like you don't even know. You didn't know you were pairing, but guess what you're doing? You're pairing. Like I agree with you. People don't know that. And I can't imagine any developer today who has never done that, who's never said, hey, can you take a look at this for a sec, or gone over to help somebody with a problem. I don't know if they necessarily would tag it as pairing, but that would mean that every developer likely has done some sort of pairing in their career.
Yeah, totally. So like as I try to convert more people into pair programmers, I find this is kind of an argument I'm making a lot, which is like you've almost certainly already done this and it's not a big deal. So like there's not a big moment that's about to happen where now you become a pair programmer. It's like you're probably already on your way, and we're going to refine some things, and that's about it.
Yeah. So I think you're underplaying it a little bit because it does still have a marketing problem, right? That's why, when I talk about pair programming, I do typically say it's like the underhanded free throw in the NBA, right? Because it is, statistically proven to be more effective, however, looks dumb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a great analogy. And I think it is a good example of those feels slow is fast type things in development, where it's like, we don't have time to write tests. If I have to stop to write tests, it's going to take me 30% longer to ship every feature. And it's like, yeah, today. But over the long term, this thing that maybe feels slow is going to pay you back in huge dividends. Would you say pairing is like that?
Yeah, it is a long-term gain, right? Mm-hmm. I would even argue that line people say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Like, I get how people like to use that for pair programming, but I still don't agree, right? Like, now here's your example, even on tests. I used to be, when I was in my much, much younger days, like pretty interested in like the ACM programming competition world. I did the high school tests, and when Top Coder came out, I would, my nerdy free time, I would be like, oh, I'll do some Top Coder tests, which is, for those who are listening, you can do, it's like a 90-minute competition. They give you 3 problems. You have 90 minutes to solve it. And then it runs like an automated suite again. So like there's a bunch of ways that you can get points and bragging rights. Even in those competitions, I would write tests. And even though I had 90 minutes to do 3 problems, and people say, why were you doing it? You're wasting time. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't know when I'm done. I'm done when the tests pass. And the fastest way for me to do that, even in 90-minute increments, is to write the tests first. And so for me, it was, an inherent thing, even with pairing, that for me, pairing's always faster. Right now, there's tons of long-term gains, but even if I have a problem to solve today, right? Let's say we have to solve this by end of day Friday. Pairing for me is the most effective way to get that done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why don't we dispense with sort of the easiest, most obvious counter argument and move on to more interesting things? Which the obvious one being like, oh, if I put two programmers on one thing, we're going to go half as fast.
Right.
Any counters to that? Why is this not stupid?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why people say that is that intuitively it feels like, maybe not intuitively, but it feels like the keyboard, is the bandwidth limiter, right? Like if two people don't have a keyboard that they can type on, like they're going to be limited by how fast they can type. I'm like, but programming is not limited by typing speed. Program is not IO bound, right? Programming is engineer brainpower bound. And so that's why there's that also really good saying, which says, well, if I have two engineers, won't they write half as much code? And the answer is, oh, no, I hope they write even less.
Yeah,
because it's not numbers of lines of code, which is the metric. It's can they solve the problem in a maintainable, flexible, understandable way for the long term. Yes. And there are two people working together to solve a problem together. And that's why I really like the analogy of flying an airplane, right? You have two pilots. They have the exact same sets of controls. They have the same goal. They want to get to the destination safely and on time. And they work together to do that. They check each other. They ask each other questions. And they likely get smarter over time by working with each other and saying, whoa, I didn't even know that we could do that. Or I didn't understand how that worked. Or they get into a hairy situation that they get out of. That's exactly the same thing with pair programming.
Right. Because quality matters. We're not making widgets where we're just sort of cranking them out. The thing that, to me, slows down projects over the long term, which is what matters, is not great code or siloed information where people don't understand the different pieces of the system and they get sort of stuck in a certain place. And pairing solves for that real long-term problem. It's not so much just like how many widgets can we crank out how fast. It's a year from now, is the system still going to be understandable and maintainable? Is our defect rate reasonable? Have we written good code that we're proud of and that has good test coverage and all these things? And by the way, are we happy? Like there's surveys done of people that adopt pair programming, and it makes them enjoy their job more. Like we're sort of, I think, naturally fairly social creatures, and so people pairing report higher job satisfaction.
Right. No, and I think again, it's counterintuitive because it sounds like, but if I don't have my own computer and I don't have my own autonomy, how is that possible? And I think there's another not a misnomer, but an amazing side effect from pair programming, which is that, yes, we get higher quality code. Maybe we write even less code because it's more elegant or easier to understand and it solves the problem. But we get smarter, right? So there's this notion of if you want to learn, and this is what I took away from pairing with that intern all the way back in 2009 at Extreme Labs, is that I didn't know that I could learn this quickly, right? And I think that's what really turned the light bulb on for me. I was like, not only did we build the thing, like that's amazing, but I learned so much in 3 months. I don't think I could have learned this. Like, how is it possible I was learning constantly 8 hours a day?
Yeah. I've heard you reference that this is like the apprenticeship model that humans have been doing for hundreds of years. Like it makes sense that our brains are wired to take in information this way, like a super high throughput kind of way. It's like we've been working next to each other, more experienced people with journey people for so long. Like it works. It's a good model.
But and you're totally right. Like here's a good example, right? My dad is an options trader, and he kept trying to describe to me. He's like, "Oh, here's what I'm like. It doesn't matter. I'm going to come over, and I'm going to watch you trade for the day." And what is that? It's pairing, right? He's doing it. I'm asking him questions. He's like, "Okay, do you want to do one?" Like, and like it's literally pair. We're a pair, option trading. But for me, I was like, that's the fastest way I could learn it. Was to sit beside somebody and do it. And, I'm always trying to optimize learning. I think that has the longest term arc for anybody in there, whether it's you're thinking about career or just life, right? Like, a good example is, I'm getting pretty nerdy about chess these days, just doing lots of chess puzzles and reading just, things to do as a nerd when I have some free time. And one of my friends is the youngest ever Canadian grandmaster, right? Like, so what better way to learn than to watch him play simultaneous chess and understand his thinking around the chess? Like there is no faster way. I can read as many chess books as I want, right? And play as many games, but just pair with him and what would I do? What would he do? Like there's no better way.
Totally. Yeah. I also imagine, especially as someone who is a leader of large engineering teams, when you're thinking about where your leverage is, like how do you make a team of thousands of engineers better or more effective? A huge thing, like think a question to answer is like, are they all improving in skill? Are they all getting better at their jobs? And I think pairing is such a good tool for that. It's sort of an underrated benefit.
Yeah, so there's different levels of religiosity around pair programming in the world, right? There are definitely the pair programming shops, right, that focus on 8 hours a day of pair programming, where I came from at Extreme Labs and Pivotal Labs, where it was the way we did things. And then what's amazing about Shopify is we have a much more non-deterministic way to build the product. Teams take it upon themselves to define how they want to work. And so pair programming in the Shopify model is a tool that we use in our toolkit, which means you don't have to use it 8 hours a day, but you can. And there are teams who do. You can do it for a few hours a day on a certain problem. It could be scheduled. It could be only when you have an issue. It can be as part of a ramp up. It can be, we use Tuple, of course, right? We can do it in a remote onboarding situation. It doesn't have to be only programming, right? You can do it in a way that allows you to, like I said, I was doing pair email writing to clients or pair learning how to stock option trade. I would actually do pair invoicing. So every, at Extreme Labs, we were a consulting firm. Every month we send invoices. I would sit down with Anna from finance and we would pair for almost 2 hours and do all of the invoices for the entire month. And guess what? We always found errors in each other's work because we're pairing. We're going to find that. And it was always a better experience because we did it together. Like we learned from each other and we did it. And it was an important function, so important that you shouldn't do it alone. Actually, one of the things people thought was funny was when we were selling we sold the company to Pivotal Labs in 2013, Sunny, the CTO of Extreme Labs, and I would pair on a bunch of the work we had to deliver as due diligence items to Pivotal Labs. Also, Raul and Amr, the other two executives, they were pairing on business items. And so we would just have one computer and we would sit there and we'd pair on PowerPoint, we'd pair on Excel, we'd pair. And why did we do that? Because it was faster, less error prone. We were both learning from each other about how we thought about the business. Like it was natural for us to think that way.
Yeah, the faster thing I think is an interesting and counterintuitive result there, where it's like it seems like the trade-off should be, yes, there are benefits of education and knowledge spreading and maybe enjoyment, but surely this is slower overall to pair with people. And the weird thing that I've experienced, I think you have as well, is that it's really easy to get blocked in programming and just be stuck, or to not be blocked, but to be going down the wrong path for a long time before realizing, wow, all this code I wrote is actually kind of wasted. And the beauty of pairing is you spend so much less time blocked, and that you're more likely to find a closer to optimal solution in the solution set when someone else is helping you. And so even that trade-off you think you'd have to make of speed doesn't really seem to be very much there.
Yeah, it's because your pair is faster than Stack Overflow, right? You're again, if you take the two Venn diagrams of experience, the places where both people would be stuck is probably is by definition much smaller than where you would get stuck by yourself. So one, you have that buffer of someone could go, oh, I can take over, and they take over and they're like, I know how to do this. And they'll start taking it forward, and you can then become the navigator and help them through those issues. I think the faster thing is counterintuitive because people feel like freedom for some reason is going to be faster. Like, let me go about it my own way, or let me do it myself before I try to bother other people. And there are definite things you can learn by approaching things on your own. And, for example, you can really determine the level of onboarding and documentation quality by doing it yourself, because now you don't have someone else steering you, and you're like, oh, but if it's not in the docs and you didn't figure it out, you can actually make the quality of the documentation better. So there are times when you want to do that. And I would say, we should probably talk about this at some point, like what are the downsides of pairing? But there are lots and lots of upsides that I think are counterintuitive, including the speed one, because people do I think maybe over the long term, there's a speed advantage. I would contend that there's a short-term speed advantage as well.
That's actually my next bullet point is, what is the best argument against pairing?
So let's go over what I would say like the downsides are, and then you can figure out if you think that there are large enough downsides.
Okay.
Or large enough to be like a big counter argument.
Mm-hmm.
One, it is much more tiring than regular on your own work. Why? Mm-hmm. It's because it's intense. It's because it's with someone else together. So you've got to play off each other, and it requires much more active participation. So that makes it more tiring. Actually, one of the things we used to say at Pivotal Labs is for the first 2 or 3 weeks of your pair programming journey, like learning how to pair program at Pivotal Labs, you'll probably sleep more than 8 hours a night because it is actually that level of intensity and tiredness.
Is that sustainable? Like, do people break down like with that much pairing eventually?
So I will say yes and no. On the yes side, I would say that I have definitely I've worked with lots of engineers over my career, and I know lots and lots of them who no longer pair anymore. Right. So we can talk about that as, as a, like, did they burn out from pairing or not? Mm-hmm. On the intensity side, I would say because it is tiring, and on the no side, I know people who have paired for many, many, many years, like maybe even over a decade. And because of the sustainable pace nature of pairing, meaning you can't really do it for more than 8 hours a day, like it is that intense, that you don't end up in these like 16-hour, I'm going to go coding like for crazy marathon sessions as much as you would on your own, because it is so intense. So I think that it's a natural stopping point and trade-off, but it is more tiring. I think people do feel like it's less autonomous. So, if you are somebody who is used to, jumping onto Reddit or Twitter or Facebook, YouTube or whatever during the workday, or using your phone, like, those distractions, like, and maybe that's part of how you work because it helps you for whatever reason, like take those short mind breaks. Pairing will be much harder. Now, my retort to that is just plan for breaks with your pair, which you should totally do. And we encourage that. Just take them at the same time, right? And the other thing I would say is don't take a half-ass break. Like, don't go and check like Reddit. Stand up and go for a walk for 10-minute break or 15-minute break. We used to play ping pong at Pivotal Labs, Extreme Labs. I take a real like screen away like break and then come back fresh, ready for another intense session. So, I'm not trying to like retort everything that I say, but I think that there are pros and cons for how to approach it. And I would say the other thing is maybe if it's not for everybody, the religious version of pairing, which is like the 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I think it is doable, sustainable for the long term. But if, you're a company that everybody didn't sign up for that, it may be a tough cultural shift to that type of thing. However, if you do it and it can be done, can be quite fruitful.
If you were starting a startup today and hired a handful of engineers, would you want them to pair in that manner?
This is like a layup question for me. I started a company in 2015 after I did Extreme Labs and got acquired by Pivotal Labs. And with, Daniel DeBow and I started it, and with our own money, meaning like we didn't have any funding at the beginning. Mm-hmm. We paid engineers to pair program, meaning we put 2 people on one machine. And that's because I did it because I think it's more effective and helped us get to build our product faster. Now, one thing that's interesting is I had somebody the other day messaged me from one of the big VC firms and said, it's incredible how many amazing high quality products Helpful built with that small team in that amount of time. And to me, like, not saying that it was an amazing team and amazing products. Like, it was no surprise to me. Like, we know that this helps us be effective and build amazing stuff.
So you're in a bit of a nice situation, which is I've seen Toby, CEO of Shopify, tweet how much he likes pair programming. He's a programmer and he likes pairing. So you've got support from all the way at the founder level, which is, I assume, is pretty great. Do you have any advice for people that are in engineering leadership, but maybe don't have as much support or just as much familiarity from people above them?
Yeah, I mean, so this is funny because I'm trying to, I'm writing something about this topic also right now. But what's interesting about any sort of technique, whether it's pairing, whether it's like TDD or CI. Like there's all sorts of techniques that engineering leaders might want to try in their teams. I think that the approach to trying an experiment is something that people have to become comfortable with, and whatever works for them and their team. And pairing should just fit into that framework. So for example, you might say, hey team, we're going to try to do stand-ups. Okay, so what that means is we're going to structure it. It's going to be a 10-minute meeting. It's always going to be at 9:30. We're going to do it every day. We're going to use this tool to capture. Like, I think that, thinking it through and how you're going to do it is the way that any experiment should be begun. The same is true of pairing. You should say, hey team, we're going to try a pair programming experiment. Maybe it's only 1 or 2 pairs. You're going to hopefully set up their workstations. You're going to talk to them and say what overlapping time periods work. Are you going to do it 5 days a week or less? Are you going to do it 8 hours a day or less? Like, just like the stand-up experiment, you're going to try to figure that out, but treat it as an experiment. Just like the stand-up experiment, you probably want to do it for over a month to like get the feels for like, is it working? Did it increase context? Did people find like it's a good use of time? Are we using the right tools? Like exactly the same way. And I feel like people don't give it its just desserts because they do treat it ad hoc. Like, oh yeah, we tried it for like a couple of days last week and then we didn't really get the benefit. And I'm like, well, you didn't really try it, right? Because you didn't have it. I'm not trying to be like super structured, but I'm saying like you want to at least treat it like an experiment and then see how people do. Now, when people have approached it that way, what I have found is when you're almost like black box testing it, like not really like talking to everyone about yours, like, hey, let's try this experiment. You probably don't bring every experiment to like the CEO of your company. And just see what the external impact of it is. Meaning, does it look like that team in particular and maybe the overall org starts sharing more context, feeling happier because the engineers are learning a lot? Is the output coming from that team slowly rising? Then you could go to the team and say, hey, by the way, we've been doing this like super weird, crazy experiment. Like, I know I'm like 6'7", but I'm starting to throw the basketball underhanded and it's like crazy accurate. Like, and people are like, what is this guy doing? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But I think you want to approach it that way, almost like any crazy experiment. Like, I remember this from a previous company. I talked to a buddy who got acquired, and he used to work at Microsoft, and he got acquired to a company, and he would always say at the new company, oh, you know what, Microsoft, we do this, and everybody always shut it down. And now what he does instead is he says, hey, team, I have this crazy idea. Like, we should try, like, what if we tried this? And then they would try it for like 6 weeks and go, you know what, that was a really good idea. And then later he'd be like, by the way, that was how Microsoft does it. Like, sometimes people are just averse to too much information and averse to the initial reaction of like 2 people on 1 keyboard. I don't get it. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But just by black box seeing the output and the happiness and the learning, and maybe people start swapping pairs, and there's all kinds of questions we haven't got into yet. But that's like a better way to kind of show them some stuff and be like, oh, by the way, we've been doing this crazy thing. Like, I don't even understand how it works, but it looking like positive so far.
Yeah, I like that. I think the positioning goes a long way in getting people to accept trying it out. And that's why, like, I usually am downplaying how complex or formal pairing needs to be. Because I'm like, oh, just give it a shot. Just sit down and talk to somebody. And it's no big deal.
Yeah, and I like that. I just want to make sure people treat it like an experiment that they can walk away from and say, you know what, we did try it and we weren't able to get the benefits, which is totally fair. Not underhanded free throws will not work for 100% of the people in the NBA. I can almost guarantee that. So same with pairing. I'm sure it works for more people than are doing it today, but it may not work for everyone. Everyone's different. So
we both, I think, want to make pairing sound kind of straightforward or possibly easy, but I think we would also both agree that there is a skill to it, right? And so if there is a skill to pairing, what is it? What do I need to learn that makes me a good person to pair with?
You've hit upon a really important point. I would say one of the key skills, and we used to talk about this at Pivotal a lot, is empathy. Is really understanding between you and your pair how to work together to solve the problem. And so what that means is that you have to be able to offer suggestions, take suggestions, go down a path you may not feel like is totally fruitful, lead somebody else down a path that they may not think is fruitful, like in a way that kind of bounces and balances between each other such that you are both learning and are both accomplishing the goal. And it is nuanced, right? Because, you can be a bad pair, right? If you are not open. And actually, one of the, maybe this is an aside, but one of the cool things about, pre-COVID days of running Extreme Labs is I could actually walk around and tell you what pairs were not working just by looking, because you could see active people engaged and you could see somebody leaning back, not engaged. And you could really tell that this pair is working or not. And so I would say there are a lot of interpersonal skills that have to be worked on, which is why hopefully in any sort of interviewing experience, it's something that you filter for.
Yeah. Do you pair with people during interviews at Shopify?
Yes, we do. So we actually have a stage of the interview called pair programming. Mm-hmm. It is different than what we did at Pivotal. So let me explain kind of both approaches. At Shopify, we do a pair programming problem, which is probably quite typical, which is we give you a problem, the screen is shared, the candidate is the driver, and the interviewer is the navigator, nudging them into different areas, answering questions. Like that's the typical pair programming interview that you probably see. At Pivotal, they had this very interesting approach, which was called the RPI. It was based on Rob Me. R stands for Rob, so Rob pairing interview. And Rob Me came up with this approach. And what was cool about it was the candidate is the navigator, and the driver is the interviewer. And so you would actually do this back then. We would do it in person, and we would have a pair programming setup with 2 monitors, but 1 keyboard and 1 mouse just for the interviewer. So the candidate doesn't even have a keyboard and mouse. And now the candidate is navigating the driver about where to go. And so you would actually, pull up a question and then say, okay, cool. What should we do next? Should we write a test? Should we write some code? And the interviewer is typing. So the interviewer is doing all the syntax, is doing all the brackets, you can ask them, what would you name this variable? So you can get pretty nitty gritty and you can lead them through with your mouse and with your cursor. But it took a lot of stress away from the candidate.
I like that a lot.
It's super
Being
cool.
nervous makes you like so physically dumb, right? Like typing becomes so hard. Mm-hmm. Thinking is a little easier, at least. Like taking some of that pain out of there sounds awesome.
Yeah, but now you're also, so what are we testing for? Empathy. Can they take feedback? Can we nudge them? Do they nudge us? How do they do that? Do I feel good after interacting with this person? Are they a good communicator? All the things that you'd want from a great pair are what we were testing for. And so, and then to take the Shopify example, it's much more visceral. We're looking for coding ability, syntax, do you actually have experience in this language? Like we're looking for those things. So I think there's trade-offs, but I think that there's good reason to think about those 2 approaches and figure out what type of approach do you want to have for your company.
Would you fire someone who was awesome at everything else but terrible at pairing?
It's a weird question because if you were at Extreme Labs or Pivotal, yes, because that's the job.
Yeah.
Now, it'd be interesting at Shopify because communication and working with others and having empathy for other problems probably is highly correlated to being a good pair.
Yeah.
So it's tough to know. But if you don't get along well with others, like you probably have a limited shelf life at any company, you may have to work on your own or wherever you could work on your own unless you're willing to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think pairing can replace code review?
Nice question. So I believe that here's a good example. In some companies, you've got certain levels of code reviewers, PR reviewers, that have to happen before you merge into production. Mm-hmm. I would contend that let's say your process is we have 2 reviewers going to production, like we do in Shopify. I would say if you're pair programming, you should only need one other.
One other. So you have a pair that writes the code and then one other person.
So you have a pair, right? So instead of having 2 reviewers, you should have 1. Yeah. I don't know if that's totally non-controversial what I just said. It's probably controversial.
Sure.
But I do believe that 2 people, it constitutes like, now there's 2 different ways to think about it. You've got 2 people, but are they in like a mind meld groupthink thing bubble? Like, should that still require 2 people? I do think, having 1 reviewer makes sense because now you want to bring somebody who has who's either has different context than the pair that wrote it. But I think you can remove one reviewer.
That's interesting. Yeah. So if at my shop we do only one reviewer and I pair on it, can I skip review here?
So 0 reviews, right? Then?
No review.
No review.
If I paired,
yeah. And so at Extreme Labs and Pivotal Labs, that's what we did. No review.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you missed the review? Like, was there a noticeable like defect difference, quality difference, any of that?
So you're making me want to run an experiment, which is
nice.
which is I would love to run the experiment of pairs shipping to production directly versus getting 1 or 2 reviews and then seeing it. So I will run that experiment and get back to you.
Cool. I would love to hear that.
I
think there's a reasonably logical argument you can make around this, which is like, it's already been reviewed continuously as you wrote line by line. You've already applied 2 separate contexts to this problem. An outside person, I think it's really challenging to review a pull request of any complexity and sophistication. A lot of people kind of check out and kind of, just like phone it in a little bit, where it's like, if you hand me 1,000 lines of changes, it's like, all right, I mean, I'm going to skim this as best I can and try to think of interesting questions, and maybe I'll catch something really obvious. But if you had 2 people working on this the whole time, chances are you've probably caught the obvious stuff, and you're asking me to interrupt my day. I'm blocking you now. I think there's a pretty good set of arguments around maybe the benefit is not there, perhaps.
Yeah, but I think that only is the case if the PR review is really just defect catching, right? The PR review is many things. It's communicating the changes that are coming down to this component that maybe someone else owns.
Yeah.
It's bringing someone else's context in, not just around defects, but around the problem and maybe what their work is. And you're like, oh, do you know that this is coming soon? Like, so PR review has it's a training tool for other people. So I think that there's a lot of things that that help the code review be still potentially a part of your process. But I agree with defect catching, and you've got multiple eyes on it. Like, all those things are a reason why I'm thinking of reducing reviewers from 2 to 1, but not to 0, because I think there's other benefits. But I think it's worth looking through that. There's actually a really good book I'm reading right now. I think it's called Software Engineering at Google, lessons from programming over a long period or something, or programming over time. And they talk about their PR process as very much a training tool and a code maintainer tool versus like just defect catching. But I agree with you. Like Pivotal and Extreme Labs, a pair was all you needed to ship.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because also if a bunch of the benefit is training and communication of what's coming down, I wonder if you could have people review code, but they're not in the review. They're not a blocker to something getting merged. Like, maybe I read all the PRs at the end of the week and just see, okay, this stuff came in, here's what's going on. Now I have the context of the project, kind of thing.
Yeah, so now you're coming up to one of my other controversial suggestions is, why don't we do the PR review after we merge to production? Right? Which is like, if you want all these benefits, but you think that we don't want to slow down our feedback cycle, then why don't we merge first and PR review when you've got time? So another experiment I want to run.
Yeah, that one sounds more dangerous to me. I feel like I think one of the weaknesses already of code review after the fact, like after it's been written, is that if you dramatically disagree with someone's approach and they hand you a giant PR, it takes a lot of social capital to be like, I'm sorry, but I really don't think you should have done it like this. Can you go rewrite this whole thing? That's much more hard than just like, oh, you're not matching the style guide here. And so if that happens and it's also already been merged, it's like, that feels like impossible to me to actually request substantial changes.
Wow, you've never worked at Shopify. So we have, in the best way, like we have a really good culture around, and now it's inherent in humans, right? Like having sunk costs, like I've done the work, but I have not worked at a company like this before where I have seen lots and lots of pre-existing work thrown out because we've actually realized that we've found a better way. And the best way then is to start over and throw out what we've already done. Whether that's, sometimes it's prototyping, like, you know what, let's just throw out all the code and start now what we know. And, you maybe saw this on Twitter where I talked about Toby and Cody, the original CTO of Shopify, pairing on feature by feature for 1 hour. And if they could not finish it in an hour, they would throw the code out, right? And Toby specifically told me, even if it was over by 1 minute, we would throw it all out and do it again. And that takes discipline, but also shows you that the learning is still there. Like, don't forget, you learned. The code is not the thing. You learned. Now let's write it properly. And so we could run this experiment where you do the PR after, and you're like, oh, by the way, I know you merged it and it's already live for customers, but we should actually unship it and redo it because the right thing is this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I do think that's a good sign of health in an organization, is not every pull request gets merged. If you merge 100% of your PRs, something actually is probably off.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think about that in my context. I would say if you had a pair, let's, in our experiment, if pair worked on it, merged it, and then if we had 100% of PRs that weren't unmerged, right, that would be a bad thing. But yes, you should go back and change things, throw out code, delete code, refactor. Like that should be part of the culture.
How can I tell if I'm pairing well, if I'm being a good pairing partner?
It's a good question. I think that there's a few different ways. I know so we didn't talk about swapping pairs, but one of the things we did in different ways at Pivotal Labs, they would actually have, let's say teams of like 6, and in the morning they would say, all right, who's pairing with who? So they would change pairs daily, which really forces you to figure out ways to share context because, every day you'd have to switch. At Extreme Labs, we did it much less often, like on the order of weeks or sometimes months, because we brought up, we didn't have as many large projects. We had lots of small projects, but also we felt like there was context being built up over time, and swapping was a good way to share context, but every day was too much for us. And one thing I heard was there were people constantly being asked to pair with. They're like, oh, I really want to pair with Alan. Can I pair with Alan? Like that was a really good sign for me that, oh, there's some good knowledge sharing going on. Alan's probably doing a lot of mentoring. So I think that's a good indicator. I think that as a person, if you feel like you're learning and getting feedback and giving feedback, and it feels like a good back and forth versus a one way, like if you're always driving or always navigating, that's probably not a healthy pairing relationship. I think that at Pivotal, we did something where on Fridays, we would spend, I think, 10 minutes or so just sharing feedback on the week, like any feedback we didn't share via pairing. And somebody might say, oh, by the way, I wish we took maybe an extra break, an extra 15 minutes after lunch. I'd like to go for a walk, or like sharing those kinds of things. People I really feel fresh if I can get an extra cup of coffee, or like those kinds of things. But even when I'm writing something, when I'm in the middle of, typing in a line of code, could you wait till the end of the line before you give me the feedback? Like there's all sorts of good back and forth there. And I think that if you're not getting feedback and giving feedback, there's probably some issues being hidden. And I think if those could be unearthed, I think that would be a good, make the relationship better. Like any relationship, not just
exactly. Feedback's everything. Totally. Are there any common pairing anti-patterns that come to mind?
So definitely if somebody's driving or navigating the majority of the time, that's an anti-pattern.
I've slipped into that, by the way.
Okay.
When I was working at a place that was using Haskell as a language, and I had never used it professionally. And I was pairing with someone a lot, and I was basically always navigating because I was afraid to drive. I hadn't written Haskell with my fingers, and I could, if someone that knew what they were doing was working, I could kind of follow along. But I had the nerves of I don't know the syntax and where to go and all that. And so I've fallen into that trap before.
Yeah, it's not easy, and unless you specifically, like I was mentioning earlier, have a culture around having the more junior person on the technology stack driving. Yeah, the navigator helping them through, here's what you do next, and I would do this. It's going to be really hard for you to get your fingers on keyboard. So I think that is an anti-pattern. What's another anti-pattern? I think I actually think maybe that's an anti-pattern for pairing, but I actually think shipping large PRs is an anti-pattern. You do want to have things early and often. You do want to go back and forth. One anti-pattern could actually be only pairing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because that's actually what's mandated by the company. It's like the religious way. And you may want to evaluate that potentially during prototyping or exploring. There may be times where you want to break away from a pair. And if there's too much religion around it, maybe it's discouraged, and maybe that could be considered an anti-pattern because you're not able to freely explore something outside of the confines of how that's set up. And so I think that, we had this notion at Extreme that it was default on, not default off, which meant you're by default pairing. And we actually didn't give everybody 2 computers, so like it was really hard. But at the same time, we had floater machines, like laptops and stuff, that were like, if you feel like your judgment, if you feel like you're at some phase or you need it to borrow for a couple hours or a couple of days, even a couple of weeks, as a side laptop for some reason, grab it. And you might get some questions like, oh, what's going on here? Like you're not paired, like, but as long as you feel like you're in the right, I think that's okay. So there was a little bit, like we were trying to be a little bit less religious about it, but it was still default on.
I have 1 or 2 anti-patterns of my own to share.
Cool.
So one is when you're navigating, thinking of yourself as a human syntax checker and typo catcher. It's like, it takes so much self-restraint, but like let the person make the syntax error or the typo and like just don't say anything for a second. And what you find is like 80% of the time they catch it before they've even moved on. And then like 15 more percent of the time they catch it as soon as they get to the next line or something, or when they run the test or whatever. And like you really can, it doesn't help to break their flow. You're not providing useful things. Like you want to be at a higher level thinking, where are we going? Is this the right place to put this code? What'll come next if this works? And kind of thinking of the higher level things.
I like that one. Yeah. And I think that's, similar to like don't start talking when I'm mid like sentence, like maybe wait till there's a natural flow state for you to enter.
I have one more thing, which is, and this would come up, I think, especially if you ascribe to the idea of having the junior person drive, which I do like. I think it's really easy to subtly convey to someone that you are bored or frustrated or that they're going too slow. Like just the tiniest voice inflection or sigh or checking your phone. Like it's really easy to actually like convey that idea, even accidentally, I think, even if you're not feeling those feelings. And so I think you have to be hyper aware of that empathy that you touched on. Like, what am I conveying to this person in all the ways that I might be conveying it to them?
Right. And then in your example, what would you suggest? Like people then take a break, have a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, so like the first thing is you have to have that patience. Like if you are this more experienced person, you might be thinking, I could probably do this faster if I were just typing, but I'm thinking of the benefit to this person and to the team and like leveling all of us up and all the future things we're going to get done and be faster because of that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think it's a combination of those things. You want to build that patience in you, but I would say if you're feeling that, it's probably better to say, hey, just FYI, can we take a 5-minute break? I need to
I like that.
Reset or whatever it is. And that's probably a good mental break for everybody.
Yep. I dig it. All right. Do you want to talk for a second about Tuple at Shopify these days?
Yeah, sure. So Tuple, so I say Tuple. So I know.
They're both correct. Say whatever you like.
Both correct.
Yeah.
So what are we doing? So one of the things that I really wanted to focus on after I got to Shopify, obviously Toby's a huge pair programming fan. I'm known as a pair programming advocate, and we really wanted to reduce all the friction to pairing at Shopify. And so, when we were in our offices, we had pair programming rooms, and we made them unbookable. So before they were bookable, then we made them unbookable because we found people are booking them for non-pairing sessions. We made them unbookable, so anybody. Then we made them bookable only by like the R&D team, which is like engineering, design, and product, because they were also pairing on non-programming tests, but we want to make them easy to use. And one of the parts was like standardizing on a tool. And the reason to standardize was really around friction reduction, because there are lots of like not so good tools, right? Like I know, for example, people who are pairing over like Google Meet, and not saying anything bad about Google Meet, but it's not ideal for pairing, and other tools as well. And after, I don't remember actually how it got into Shopify. Was it through me or somebody else? I don't remember.
I think it started just at the ground level. I think you just had a few people sign up and it spread from there.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody was using it, and the feedback was super strong. They're like, whoa, I tried this thing and it was really good for pairing. And over time, I actually ended up doing a Hack Days project, maybe 2 or 3 Hack Days ago. So we do 3 times a year, like 3 days, get to hack on whatever you want. I think it was 3 Hack Days ago. And I was pairing using Tuple.
Nice.
And I was like, holy shit, this is like, it even blew me away after like seeing the different tools that we had used. Even the ability to be like an observer, and watching how it really was opinionated around, sharing the entire screen, and low latency and the audio. And like, I felt that it was, it was very well presented and very well focused on the problem it solved. And so I just decided to say, hey, look, this is the best tool. Let's standardize it across Shopify. And hence why we have a site license. And then all the other stuff, like you and I talking and going back and forth, that all happened like separately from the Shopify relationship.
Cool. So you said before the call you had some like you were going to beat us up a little bit, or you had some complaints. So lay it on me. What do you got?
Yeah, sure. So I would say a few things. So one is, I don't know, and maybe this is solved now, but a lot of people message me about Tuple, which means maybe the tool is not making it easy for people to know where to give feedback.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe they send it to me.
Feedback to you about it. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So maybe you get a lot, which means maybe a few people send it to me, but people go, hey, it would be really cool if Tuple. I'm like, cool. Why don't you email them? Like they send it to me. So I don't know why.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder why that is.
Yeah. So that happens to me. So so some of the emails you get are probably because people message me and I said, you should message Ben.
Go email them. Yeah.
So that's one. The other one I haven't figured out for me is that, so I use it like sparingly, but every time I reboot my computer, it starts up. And I always have to
is it popping open when it starts up?
Yes, it pops open and always tells me to authenticate. And I'm like, because I don't use it enough that I'm like, I don't want to authenticate with it. And I don't want to give it, I go through all my permissions pretty often. And I like, if I go in my thing, it has like Zoom has camera, Tuple has camera, WebEx. And I'm like, I always uninstall these things. Yeah. So I just like a way to like not have it start on.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's not supposed to be doing that. I think we may have fixed that, and we just need to like have you log out or reboot or something. But we'll make sure that's fixed. Yeah.
So I think those are two. What's the third one? Oh, the third feature request I get a lot is people want to have more than 3 people.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a very popular feature request, and I think that's because not that people want to do like mob programming, but I think that they want to have more than one observer. So I think having a pair and then having more observers is useful.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do tell me they wish they could have more than 2 people actually pairing. Maybe that is mob programming. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm curious. Like, are they mostly mobbing? Like, are they working on code? Are they reviewing designs? Or
I think I think it's code. That's a good question to ask. Mobbing still should be one keyboard. So I'm surprised that they want to all control it. Well, not surprised because people want to control things. But like I had a great experience as an observer. Like, because I joined a pairing session and I actually liked the fact that it was clear what my role was. And my role was to ask questions, articulate, and I wasn't going to do any further contribution. Like that was actually key for how I was involved in that project.
Yeah. Gotcha. That's cool. And so when people can't add more observers, do you know what they do? Do they fall back to Google Meet or something, or do they just?
I think they do.
Okay.
I think they do use Google Meet or something else. I don't know. Brutal. I don't know. It's worth asking those people.
Yeah.
But other than that, like it seems to be a very well liked and popular tool. And the feedback from like, it seems like people message you and you get back to them. And, I think we had reached out to you with a bug and everybody felt like everybody was very quickly on it and looking at it. And our team was like, they're on top of it.
Cool. Great. That to me is so essential for us. Like we're a small startup. And so like we can't bring all the things that a big company can bring to the table, but we can be really crazy responsive and like give a lot of attention. And so that's important to me that we do that.
Yeah. How big are you guys?
So there's 3 co-founders, and then we have 1 full-time engineer, and then we have a part-time support person and a part-time salesperson.
That's it.
That's it.
Wait, and so all the co-founders are coding?
Actually only 2 of the co-founders.
Okay, so 2 co-founders code, another coder. So 3 coders out of 4 full-time?
Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So we're little, and I'm off here doing stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I message you all the time and you're pretty responsive. So
cool.
Yeah. And I would say, so last thing for companies, and this is like a feature request that you and I are trying to work through, is how do you give us information on how pairing is going? Yeah. And for people like me who want to further reduce the friction to pairing so that people can use it as an instant tool in their toolkit, even less friction, use it on, a 15-minute problem, right? Like I want to get to that level. Like, here's where I want to see it used, right? We have a production issue on Shopify. I want people to be able to use Tuple to be like,
100%.
We got to solve this.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, let's keep talking about it. We'll figure out how to do it.
All right. Well, thanks for having the conversation.
This was great to talk to you. I really enjoyed it.
Same. And we had never met before today. So that's funny also.
Perfect. Instant rapport. Well, thanks again. Great chatting with you.
You too.
All
Bye.
Right.